Hello, fellow Singaporeans and friends. This is Nitin again, and this is an update regarding the fight against corrupt tactics in Singapore. This is the part 2 of the series presentation I had promised to bring to you. If you recall, in the part 1 of my presentation, I had highlighted that the corruption in Singapore is a high level corruption, which involves politicians, government agencies, GLCs, and all of them are well aware, and hence the corruption is being intentionally covered up. I had indicated that the cancer of corruption in Singapore has already spread substantially and the loot is massive. Hundreds of millions of dollars of our hard earned money, including our Singapore reserves, are getting misappropriated. There is no one to challenge or control. One of the root cause of the external high cost of living in Singapore is indeed corruption. We, the citizens, have to take a lead to eradicate corruption because none of the politicians, not even the opposition party, is interested in listening about the corruption issues. The Constitution of Singapore and the rule of law is being openly violated, and we citizens have no reprieve. Let's address the fundamental question as to why do I have to resort to such presentations. Please understand that I have the evidence of corruption scandals in Singapore since almost 2 decades. I have the first hand information about the money being laundered, the monkey business, due to my positions held in the past. I have witnessed the loot, objected the loot, refused to be the scapegoat of the corrupt practices, due to which I have suffered a lot, but I firmly stand to fight for a corruption free Singapore. The President of Singapore, the ex Prime Minister, ex senior ministers, MPs, opposition party politicians, chairmen of GLCs, CPIB, CAD, AGC, all know about the corruption cases and its cover up, but no action is being taken against several corrupt Singaporeans, mainly because they are high level. People who exposes the high level corruption are being targeted and are crushed. I am one of the victims. The sole objective of this fight against corrupt tactics is to safeguard the future of Singapore. The intent is not to criticize anybody or any entity. Nevertheless, in this process, if any reputation gets impacted, the organizations responsible for the corruption investigation and its cover up are solely responsible. I have already highlighted to them that I have no choice but to make this public because corruption is being shamelessly covered up. The Constitution of Singapore gives us the right of the freedom of speech, specifically when its purpose is to protect Singapore's intent. In this presentation, I am going to give one example to prove how blurred the vision of Singapore companies are. You will also get a good flavor of the magnitude of the loot involved. Another real example of the full-fledged monkey business in Singapore, GLCs and governments carries out is a classic example and the proof of corruption. The first example is in the oil and gas sector, a project involved in Brazil, Latin America, involving the government and private companies from those countries, big Japanese conglomerate and contractors, Singapore company, and several other private companies from Latin America. You can Google Itaborai, the oil boomtown which never was, or Operations Car Wash, and you will come to know the details. The fundamental question for Singapore companies is, do we really understand business, particularly in this case, say in Latin America? There is a saying that when Singaporeans don't even know Chinese opera, how can they do samba, salsa, and tango? In the very early stage of the project, it was crystal clear that the project capex was jacked up to such a high level that it was not feasible to make any meaningful profit. Any layman with common sense would never get involved in an investment intended solely to loot money. But big bosses in Singapore companies believe they are the smartest in the world. Just for clarity, the consortium misused the services and money of the Singapore company to get the front end loading done, and tactfully at the right time were kicked off. Not that the Singapore company was smart enough to understand the risk, but in fact, the Singapore company was desperate to invest because there was millions to be made under the table. The article published by Bloomberg in May 2016 shocked the world. The summary of what happened is as follows. Another casualty of the corruption scandal engulfing Brazil was what was indicated in the Bloomberg article in 2016. Itaborai's refinery is empty inside, which was supposed to create 100,000 jobs. The project known as Compurge became a symbol of pervasive corruption at Brazil's state-run oil producer. The investigation by federal police and the prosecution, dubbed Operation Car Wash, has revealed massive graft implicating construction conglomerates, banks, oil service providers, shipbuilders, and politicians. An article published by Bloomberg also indicated that the project budget in 2004 was $2.4 billion. The same project with high quality in Qatar would cost only 1.5 billion. The project budget in 2008 was jacked up to 8.4 billion. Singapore companies desperately wanted to invest in 2009. The question is, if you are a decision maker, instead of the Singapore company, would you ever agree to get involved in a project which in Qatar would have cost only 1.5 billion, but you are going to invest in a project costing 8.4 billion? That's not the end. The project capex landed ultimately in 2016 at 14 billion, and the status of the project, it was incomplete. The entire town and the construction site is now a ghost town. Investors who subscribed in the 2010 IPO sued Petrobras for false statements, overstating asset value, accepting bribes, and so on. Around 100 people, including politicians and CEOs, were arrested, convinced that that project was supposed to hold 7 plants or complexes. Unfortunately, the Compoj is now down to a small single refinery, that too incomplete. And the root cause of the problem is the irregularities in the purchase of goods and services, bribes, corruption, and the court documents related to the car wash probe shows that the contracts at Compoj were rigged by a cartel of 16 companies, which made continual intentional changes to the project to boost their gains. So, dear friends, do you now understand why Singapore companies want to get involved in Latin American projects? Just to do tango, just to milk money unethically. Now, let me lead to the second example, which demonstrates the massive monkey business of Singapore companies, including government as a whole. The project started in 2010, and it was Singapore's biggest investment in India in a coal-fired power plant project and assets. You can Google it, and the basic details are all available online. In 2010, the Congress was the ruling party in India. Corruption was at its pinnacle. Indian local partners was a politically linked company with the Congress ruling party. Power sector in India was very tricky, and extreme levels of risk were involved due to the inflated and unsustainable tariffs, exorbitant capex due to the equity siphoning from the debt, the uncontrolled and continuous devaluation of the Indian rupee, the high taxes and duties, and the red tapes for doing business. Any genuine foreign investors would stay away from investing in the Indian power sector then. The phase 1 capex was 1.5 billion, with the Singapore company taking a 49% stake and the local partner taking the balance 51% stake. Based on the net worth of the local partner, they had no ability to pump in an equity of around 191 million US dollar. Yet, without any review, without any due diligence, without mitigating the risk, the Singapore company proceeded with the partnership. Singapore company started the monkey business first by trying to cheat their local partners and jacking up the insurance underwriting cost. The local partner, being smart enough, got a quotation for the same scope of work and reduced cost by 67 times. So you can imagine the amount of money that Singapore companies want to loot. Singapore companies lost its reputation and had to agree with the partner that Singapore company will siphon money from the Chinese boiler, turbine and generator contractor, while the Indian company will siphon money from the Indian balance of plant contractor. What they termed as a win-win situation, or in other words, you loot and I will also loot. The floodgates for jacking up the capex and siphon money began. Contractors were pre-selected with corruption in mind. life cycle cost analysis were ignored. Development company became the slaves of the contractor. There was a violation of the international competitive bidding process, bought inefficient equipment and compromised on the service quality, including the liquidated damages. Forgery of documents, manipulation of prices, loan agreement violation, bribery, corruption, price jack-up, money siphoning, irrational agreements for money laundering, agreements with companies not having any association with the project, exorbitant premiums paid by the Singapore company, and the EPC contractors taking the developers for a ride, tax violations, you name an irregularity, and it was clearly visible that it's indeed involved in the project. Since the boiler, turbine, and generator, the balance of plant contractors are complicated to explain in a short presentation like this. For the ease of understanding, let us take an example of structural steel, which Singapore understands very well, because whether it's the industries, the MRT line construction, the north-south corridor, and the commercial building and residential apartments construction, all substantially uses structural steel. As we know, the supply of structural steel by and large comes from China, and hence it was under the scope of the Chinese contractor. China was and is the world's manufacturing factory. After the 2008 financial crisis and the oversupply of the residential apartments in China, there was plenty of surplus and oversupply of structural steel in China. There was a massive economy of scale possible in the power project. 1 ton of structural steel in 2010 was going at a unit rate of approximately US$ 587 per ton. Let's give a benefit of doubt that, oh, the power plant structures are a bit complicated, and hence we can estimate a price of $750 per 1 ton of structural steel. Now, if a client wants to say buy 100 tons, wouldn't the price go down? What if a client wants to buy 1000 tons? The price has an ability to further get reduced. The first lot of the purchase of structural steel itself was 28,700 tons, and based on this quantum, the negotiated unit price could have coolly been approximately $500 per ton. Despite the massive economy of scale, the letter of intent signed with the Chinese company was at a rate of $1,300 per ton, or in another word, $800 per ton charge extra, or approximately $23 million paid extra, not for fun, but for under the table paybacks and money laundering. Even worse, the development company even signed an agreement with the subsidiary of the Singapore company at a rate to supply the same structural steel at US $1,400 per ton, and even up to 2,945 per ton for a huge quantity of another 25,000 metric ton, 15,000 metric tons, and so on. Millions of dollars worth of overcharging in just structural steel alone. Imagine the same magnitude of monkey business for boilers, turbine, generator, balance of plant, installation, testing, and commissioning. The fact that the Singapore company and the Indian company became the subcontractor of the development company is a proof of monkey business. Despite all these irregularities, neither the internal auditor, nor the external auditor, nor CPIB, nor CAD, nor AGC, nor the Prime Minister's office, or even the President's office can find anything wrong. Why? Because the money and the benefits is going to their inner circle. CPIB's rules of do's and don'ts do not apply to their inner circle. It was crystal clear within the first 2 years that making money in the Indian power sector is an uphill task, if not impossible. The investment of the first phase, that is of $1.5 billion, was stuck. What would a smart investor do in such a situation? Exit and reduce the stake, right? But no, despite knowing that they are going to lose money, the Singapore company went ahead to buy one more power plant. Even worse, they started increasing the stake to become a 100% stake owner, and the Indian company very smartly was out of the project. Will any smart investors invest in a project where money will be stuck for a long, long period? Why do they pay premiums for an overvalued and high risk project? Not satisfied with the irrational investments and unjustifiable high price, despite the Singapore company's chairman, the Prime Minister's office, MPs knowing about the high level of corruption, they went ahead to invest through GIC, Government of Singapore's money, that is, Singapore's reserves were used to buy the shares of the Indian company, a company which, other than bribing other companies in India, had no ability or expertise. The price paid by the Singapore company to buy the shares of the Indian company was at a rate of 150 Indian rupees per share. Guess what would be the current price of the same share? It is around 8 rupees per share instead of 150. So, in addition to the Singapore company, GIC, MAS, the Prime Minister's office, everyone lacks the vision and desperately were ready to blow off Singapore's money to invest in shady companies. If from just one project, the Singapore company can siphon around 500 million US dollar, imagine in 1 year how much money will they misappropriate. Trust me, it is in billions of dollars. Yet, we as Singapore citizens are helpless. We cannot do anything and just watch the cost of living go higher and higher. As expected, since the capex was so high, the plant would never make any meaningful profit, and hence they had no choice but to give away the entire project to a company based in Middle East. It was based on the terms that they will pay based on deferred payment concept. And what did the media in Singapore report? The media is only interested to feed misinformation and to divert the attention of the people. So the headline said, a good move from the brown assets to the green assets. Oh my God. Fellow Singaporeans, the root cause of that asset being given away was the corruption. It was money laundering. It was money siphoning. It was bribery. But the media projects and gives a very rosy picture of the Singapore company hiding the monkey business. Few years ago, the Singapore company again projected that they are not going to exit India, but they will invest in more projects. How far they will be profitable and what will be the profit margin is a huge question. So, dear friends, Singapore is in crisis in terms of corruption. Government agencies do not work for Singapore. They don't care about Singaporeans. They are only working for the hidden agenda of the corrupt politicians. I hope these two real life examples will wake you up and give you a real understanding that Singapore in no way is corruption free. In the next presentation, I will bring a concept to explain that how corruption increases the cost of living in Singapore. Until then, know the facts and join the fight against corrupt tactics.